Developing a culture of Eucharistic solidarity. It's chapter 5 in this book, Becoming a Eucharistic People. And I'm just going to speak a few moments about that chapter, about Eucharistic solidarity. Jesus Christ is pure love. Christ is an example of the purest kind of love, total self-giving love, not self-seeking love, total self-giving love. And Christ showed us love in really various ways throughout his ministry. He taught us examples of mercy and forgiveness and healing and understanding and compassion, from the lady at the well to the sick child that he visited. Yet his last act at the Last Supper provided us Catholics with the very body and blood throughout eternity in the form of the Eucharist. Remember that the Eucharist is the body and blood and soul and divinity of Christ. And the Eucharist solidifies our relationship together with him as his children. This solidarity is a recognition that every neighbor is a person. We share personhood in common with one another. So through the sharing of our human condition, your good and my good are linked. You become our neighbor. Our neighbor, as John Paul II writes, is the living image of God. We Catholics move beyond the limits of reason to divine revelation when we receive the Eucharist. You are sons and daughters of the living God. You were created because God loves you. So was I and Father Mano. And also the homeless person on the corner of 690 and Hiawatha Boulevard, holding up a sign saying, "I'm hungry." Our solidarity is marked by this gift of the Eucharist, forgiveness and friendship. Eucharistic solidarity is agape love, the reality of both being loved and loving back in return. If the Eucharist does not pass over the practice of love, it's fragmented, said Pope Benedict. Receiving the Eucharist is a promise to exercise the solidarity of loving one another fully. We receive truly, undeservingly, total love from God in the Eucharist, and we seek to give it away, even to those undeserving of our love. The flourishing of our neighbor is this: it's part of the gift. We want our neighbors to flourish because of our love for them, the love that we receive in the Eucharist. As we receive the Eucharist, we commit ourselves to loving our neighbor. Just like the perfection of any activity, we must learn how to pass on the love we receive from the Eucharist. The Eucharist isn't for the perfect. It's medicine for the weak. It's not a prize for the perfect. How we take our medicine, the Eucharist, and receive the divine love must be contemplated. If we receive the Eucharist at Mass and forget about it as we exit church, returning to our sinful ways and turning away from one another, we're really setting up for our own condemnation. With the Eucharist living inside us, we share the solidarity with God's love. We're changed people every time we receive the Eucharist. Are you unaware of how receiving the love of the Eucharist and the love of one another are connected? Not only the love of family, but the love of your fellow parishioners, the people who receive food from our food pantry, the unborn child and the mother contemplating abortion, or the infirmed who haven't had a visit or a friendly call in a few years since COVID started. We're called to share the love that we receive in the Eucharist with all people. The Lord provides us a way in our faith to prepare ourselves for this Eucharistic love. It's the Sacrament of Reconciliation, the action to cleanse our hearts for the Eucharistic solidarity to be engaged. Think of it. We could have a great meal prepared, but if it's served on a dirty plate, it's uninviting. Served on a clean plate, like a clean soul, the meal is even more appealing. How can you and I work on the solidarity? Think about the ways we give love. If we shift our genesis to understand the love we receive from the Eucharist from Christ, we may find that our love is much more fulfilling to ourselves and to the ones receiving our love. This is the purest love that comes from God in the Eucharist. Examples of sharing God's perfect love that comes to us in the Eucharist is to forgive, to offer comfort, to pray for and be patient with people, to teach, to counsel, to shelter, to feed, to clothe, but most importantly, to be present for people. These acts of mercy show God's love. If you do these acts inspired by Eucharistic love you've received, you're simply returning God's gift of love to others. In a ripple, like a pebble tossed into a pond, God's love received in the Eucharist is passed on from person to person to person. More and more are loved from the love that you receive. And when this happens, God's divine love wins over mankind. If half of the parishioners attending Mass and receiving the Eucharist in our parish practice this Eucharistic solidarity, realizing they receive God's total, pure, self-giving love in the Eucharist and desire to show that love to others through their kindness, how incredibly inspiring our community would be. All would ask, what's different about Holy Family? The difference would be that we treat each other out of Eucharistic love. May God bless you.